series of seminars for the new academic year. I'm Paul Ekins. I'm Professor of Resources and Environmental Policy at the UCL Energy Institute and Institute for Sustainable Resources. It's nice to see lots of you here. A couple of housekeeping things. You have to start that way. If there's a fire alarm or you smell smoke or any of that stuff, you go out of the door here, back up the stairs, and follow the fire exit signs. The gents' toilets are this floor, ladies' toilets floor above. Hope that many of you will be able to stay on a little bit afterwards with us. We will have some refreshments, a glass of wine even, and some nibbles in the Keaton room, which is top of the stairs on the ground floor, turn right, and I'm sure we'll find it. So now on with the proper business of the evening. An enormous pleasure to welcome Louise Strong, Dr. Louise Strong, Senior Policy Advisor in the Energy Policy Team at which I used to know as the Consumer Association, but which of course is now called Which. And she's the policy lead on decarbonisation, working on the issues of electricity market reform, decarbonisation of domestic heat, recently written something called The Imbalance of Power, the Challenge of Decarbonisation, and I guess we're probably going to hear a bit about that tonight. We asked Louise to come and give this talk some time ago, and I can't believe just how topical it has become. I'd like to be able to persuade you that I had a word with Ed Miliband and suggested that he might like to freeze energy prices as a policy announcement at the Labour Party conference in order to set up Louise's talk, but if I was to say that, you wouldn't believe me. So I won't. However, energy affordability is a crucially important subject, and I know of Louise's work in that area. I've known it for some time, and it's very good and important work, and I'm delighted that she's agreed to come and share it with us tonight. Welcome.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for the invitation to speak as part of this energy seminar series. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Can everyone hear me okay? Yep. As it says here, the title of my talk today is The Imbalance of Power, Information, Consumers and Energy Affordability. And before I kick off, can I just ask you to put up your hands if you're from an energy company or have worked at an energy company? Okay, just to get a sense of how unpopular I'm going to be. Energy is essential for many of our daily activities. But the energy market is a complex market. It's a market in which most consumers lack confidence in their suppliers, and they also lack confidence in their own ability to navigate the many tariffs that are on offer, so many find themselves on poor deals. It's also a market in which there's significant information asymmetry between consumers on one hand and between companies on another. And there's also a general lack of transparency, particularly around price. This information gap is a major problem, and it helps explain on one hand why consumers lack confidence in their suppliers and also more generally in the market. So it's part of the reason for why they're disengaged. Information asymmetry is also a major challenge for us as a consumer organisation trying to lobby and campaign on behalf of consumers to ensure that prices are fair and the markets work in their interests. Today I'm going to set out 3 key areas where this information asymmetry manifests itself, both directly for consumers and also for us as a consumer organisation as we work on wider energy market issues. But before I get into the meat of my presentation today, it's useful to tell you a bit about Which, where we're coming from and why we work on energy. So Which is a not-for-profit organisation, and we're independent of government and industry. We're entirely funded through our own activities, whether that's through subscriptions to our various magazines or whether it's through the products and the services that we offer, such as our Which Legal service. We've got over 1 million members, which makes us the largest consumer organisation in Europe. And our mission is to make people, every individual, as powerful as the organisations that they have to deal with in their daily lives, by empowering them to make informed decisions and by campaigning to make their lives fairer, simpler and safer. We do this by providing information, for example, through our magazines and through our website and various other products and services we offer. But we don't just provide information. We also campaign directly to change the markets themselves and to change the practices of businesses to ensure that consumers are better protected. So why do we work on energy? Energy is an essential. Consumers have no choice but to buy energy. Although there is some discretionary purchase, many of the things that households use energy for are essential, whether that's lighting or heating water or heating their rooms or cooking. The average household energy bill is now £1,315, and we've seen above inflation increases in bills. So since 2001, electricity bills have risen by around 66% and gas bills have risen by 137%. Our research shows that rising energy costs are one of the top financial concerns for consumers. I just want to move on to this graph here to illustrate this. Every month we carry out consumer insight tracker research to get a sense of how consumers feel about their spending power, how they feel about different markets, how they're satisfied they are with their lives and the various other things like that. And one of the questions that we ask every month is, what are the issues that you're concerned about financially? And what we've found in every month that we've been doing this research is that energy prices and fuel prices are vying for the top spot at the top of this chart. And this is the result from the most recent survey, which was from September of this year, so literally a few days ago. And you can see there that energy prices are second top, with 77% of consumers saying that they're either fairly or very worried about energy prices. And it's always around 80%, so it's always high. And I think just important to flag here some of the things that it comes above. So it's coming above food prices, it's coming above the value of people's pensions, housing costs, fears of losing their job. You know, important issues, and energy prices are up there at the top. Our research also shows that a majority of consumers don't trust energy companies. I'm sure this will come as no surprise, it's frequently in the media. And just to illustrate that again from some research from our most recent monthly tracker, another set of the questions that we ask consumers in this research, and I should say this isn't just members, this is a general sample of the population. You know, to what extent do they trust different sectors to act in their best interests? And we can see that gas and electricity suppliers don't fare well here either. You can see that and it's a little bit misleading this, because the key on the right shows trust and distrust as green and red, which is correct, but then to kind of mark out the gas and electricity suppliers, we've got them in different colours. So the blue line refers to trust and the yellow line distrust. And we can see there that only 27% of consumers say that they trust energy companies to act in their best interests. And what's particularly startling really about that is that's even fewer than people say they trust the banking sector to act in their interests. And the only sectors that actually are less trusted are people selling long-term financial products and car salesmen. We also face a major period of renewal, and this brings costs for energy consumers. This is partly to replace old plants that are naturally coming to the end of their lives, nuclear power stations, for example. And it's also to replace the power stations that are coming off stream because of EU environmental regulation to protect air quality. It's also to ensure that we achieve our carbon reduction and renewable energy targets. And policies to promote investment in low carbon energy bring costs for consumers. So it's really important that these are delivered in the most cost-effective way, and that consumer interest and the consumer voice is an important part of that process. In fact, just by the end of this decade, government estimates that £75 billion worth of capital investment will be needed in low carbon energy generation. That's not even the widest systems costs. So what do we do in our work on energy? Well, I've already referred to the monthly trackers that we produce, which survey attitudes across sectors, including the energy industry. We also do a lot of research specifically with consumers on the energy industry itself. We carry out mystery shopping exercises, our editorial team do for stories in the magazine, and we carry out annual satisfaction surveys. In fact, what we find with the annual satisfaction surveys in energy companies, interestingly, it's a number of the small companies that actually come out top. We've also recently produced a best practice criteria for energy suppliers, and we're working with a number of suppliers on that. We run an energy switching website called WhitchSwitch, and we also last spring organised a collective switch involving 38,000 people. It was the first collective switching initiative for energy of its kind, and the average household saving for those that participated was £223. It's actually the first and only example as well of a collective switch that resulted in a new tariff. As well as that, we also do work to lobby government and Ofgem. And this is kind of where I come in really, because I work in our energy policy team, And around 2.5 years ago, we decided we'd broaden our focus on energy market issues. Previously, we'd been working on energy efficiency in the retail market for quite a while, in fact. But then we came to the conclusion that really, if you're working on the energy sector, if you're looking at retail prices, for example, you actually need to be looking at wider systems issues. These feed through to bills. They're also really, really important. And I lead our work, as Paul said, on policies to promote low-carbon energy. Last December, actually, we produced the first in a series of reports in our Imbalance of Power series. The first focused on the retail market. The second and third came out in July, and they focused on the challenge of decarbonisation and also the retail wholesale price link. And we've got the fourth in that series coming out in November, and that will focus on the challenge of domestic energy efficiency. I'll be pulling out, as Paul indicated, a couple of recommendations from the last two reports, in fact, the first and the third report today. And I think my colleague Fiona Cochrane is here. She's the head of our energy policy team. There's got a few copies of the reports actually at the end if anybody would like to pick one up. As we've been working on the retail market the longest, and this is where consumers directly experience the market, and it's also the area that we're most known for. This is where I'll start for my examples of where information asymmetry is an issue. And I'm going to focus on the implications of this for consumers and also what we've been doing in terms of our policy work in this area. As I said, information asymmetry and a lack of transparency, particularly around price, will be the threads that run throughout my talk today. The complex and varied structure of tariffs and the lack of clear and accurate information means that, that consumers struggle to compare tariffs and don't feel confident engaged in the market. They tell us they feel like it's a lucky dip, which is what this picture illustrates. Consumer research over the past few years has repeatedly illustrated this. And these results are from a survey that we carried out in November of last year, which focused specifically on consumer attitudes towards the energy sector and energy companies. And again, this wasn't just on members, this was on a representative sample of all consumers. And just to kind of give, for anybody who can't see the key, the things on this side, the dark green, are responses that say trust a lot, going to the side where it's red when it says do not trust at all. And there's a series of statements here where we asked consumers to what extent they trust or don't trust gas and electricity companies to do a range of things. And what we found was, and what you can see from the first line there, is that 81% of people said that they trust energy companies to ensure that they provide reliable energy supplies. So energy companies fare very well on that. You know, people have confidence in their ability to deliver secure supplies. But only 42% of consumers said that they trusted energy companies to provide information that they can easily understand. And in fact, even fewer said that they trusted energy companies to charge a fair price. Focusing now on what consumers think about their specific supplier, because those results were around what they think about energy companies in general, we can see that this theme continues when it comes to information. And we asked consumers to what extent they disagreed with a number of statements, including these. And we find here that only 34% agreed with the statement that they're confident that their supplier tells them about the best deals for them. In fact, only 14% said that they strongly agreed with that statement, which is worrying given that we're talking about their own supplier here, particularly. Then we can also see that only 35% said that they agreed that their energy supplier publishes clear information about the price of tariffs that are available. It's not only our research that finds this either. I know Office for Fair Trading study from 2010 found that 46% of energy consumers who spent more than an hour comparing different tariffs still, after that hour, did not feel confident that they had made the right choice. And Ipsos Mori research from 2011 found similar results, with the energy sector actually having the highest percentage of consumers who did not know if they had switched to a better deal as a result of engaging in the market. We think this lack of confidence helps explain, or goes some way to explaining, why consumers are disengaged. And the result is that 3/4 of consumers are on the most expensive type, or among the most expensive types of tariffs. They're on standard tariffs. And recently, in fact, just a week or two ago now, we did a bit of analysis to get a scale of what this meant. And what I mean by that is to estimate what the collective loss is to consumers from being on the more expensive types of tariffs. And what we found was that this is equivalent to 3.9 billion a year. And this figure represents the cumulative annual saving that consumers would make if they were on the cheapest tariffs compared to the cost of the average yearly bill for dual fuel and Economy 7 customers. This calculation is based on data from 2011 and 12, and it's based on the entire market. We appreciate that in reality, tariffs would change. But if you hold other things constant, that's to give you a scale of what the collective consumer detriment is from being on the more expensive tariffs. We've been highlighting these problems around the lack of clear information and price transparency, among other issues, to the regulator and to a government. And we've had some successes so far. For example, suppliers need, I should say that a number of the things that we've been calling for, we're now seeing coming in, and this is some of them. For example, suppliers now need to put the names of tariffs on bills. This seems really obvious, but even information as basic as this wasn't always provided on bills before. Suppliers will also soon be required to put a summary box on bills with key tariff information such as exit fees and tariff rates. Suppliers also now have to give warning in advance that bills are going up, that prices are going up. And this is important because it gives consumers the opportunity to better budget and promote their engagement in the energy market, for example, switching to a better tariff if they know the prices are going up. We've also seen an end to automatic rollovers, so that's where consumers who are on fixed-term deals were moved on to other fixed-term deals without being told by their supplier. I mentioned before our best practice criteria, and drawing on a number of our best practice criteria, some companies are developing and redesigning their bills to make information easier to understand on bills. I should say actually that we do have regular meetings with each of the large suppliers and all of the independent suppliers too. We're in regular conversations with them and we have useful relationships with them. Many of the changes that I've just outlined are coming in as part of Ofgem's retail market review. But we don't think Ofgem's changes go far enough. And we've been advocating since the production of our report last December single unit pricing to allow consumers to compare different tariffs at a glance. So it would look something like this. We think this is the best opportunity to make tariffs, to make the focus really on price. To put the focus on price and get the companies to compete on price. It's the best opportunity, really, the best chance of getting competition to work in this market. It's important because people wouldn't need to know what tariff what their consumption is, rather, to be able to choose the best deal for them. It would also facilitate the publication of meaningful best buy tables so that people can look in various forms of media to see what the best tariffs are. We carried out some research recently, in fact I think it was in June now, with consumers to pilot single unit pricing to see how consumers found it. And what we found was that 84% of people were able to correctly identify the cheapest tariff for them with single unit pricing. We also trialled Ofgem's new tariff comparison rate, which is a prompt that they've been developing to help consumers identify the best tariffs for them. But only 28% of people were able to identify the best tariff using the tariff comparison rate. That's because it assumes average consumption. So if you're a high or low consumer, then you're not necessarily going to be on the best tariff using the TCR. So it's clearly, the research shows that it works for consumers. The distributional impacts are clearly really important because a move to single unit pricing would benefit low-income households as a population, in fact to the tune of a collective saving of £170 million a year. This is because, in general, low-income households tend to be low-consumption households, and so single unit pricing works for them. But our analysis also showed that around 600,000 low-income, high-consumption households would be disadvantaged by this transition, by this increase, and would see an increase in their bills. And we've just commissioned a piece of research to look at how existing policies and new policies could be targeted to help overcome this, for example, ECO and the Warm Homes Discount. We're continuing to push for an amendment to the energy bill which would allow the government to define tariff structure and allow the introduction of single unit pricing, and we'll be continuing to monitor the level of consumer engagement and how tariffs evolve with Ofgem's retail market review changes as they take effect. A lot of them have got to come in, I think, by March next year, and a number of companies have started to make the changes already. So moving on to my second case study, which is district heating. The problems around a lack of price transparency and information asymmetries aren't just confined to people that have gas and electric heating. We also find that there's similar problems, well, not similar problems, but other related problems when we look at district heating. Currently, around 210,000 households have district heating. I'm sure most of you will know what this is, probably everybody does. But for anybody that doesn't, district heating refers to when homes and other buildings, rather than having an individual boiler in their building, they get their heat through a central heat source, with the heat being transferred through a series of hot water pipes. And under the government's plans to cut emissions from heat, domestic heat production, in fact, heat production across the board, it wants to see a transition to more people having district heating. This is because these technologies are compatible with low carbon technologies, whether that's combined heat and power or biomass or waste heat sources. And estimates for government suggest that by the end of the next decade, so around 2030, we could see around 20% of all homes on district heating. So the scale of the upscaling that we might see is significant. And there's quite a few new schemes being developed at the moment in London, particularly for new build flats. But district heating schemes are a monopoly, and the consumers that are on them have little choice but to remain with them, even if they're unhappy with their supplier and the quality of the service they receive, or with the price that they pay. I mean, they could stop getting heat through the district heat network, but they'd have to have an expensive option like on-peak electric plug-in heaters, something like that, and they'd have to come up with a solution for their hot water too, so it's not ideal. Ofgem has no role in this area at the moment, and there are no licence conditions for heat suppliers, so this is obviously in contrast with gas and electricity suppliers. And also, unlike consumers that get their heat from gas and electricity, district heating customers, if they've got a problem with their supplier, they're not protected through the Energy Ombudsman. So there's clearly a number of consumer protection issues here. When we started looking at this area about 6 months ago now, I was struck by the lack of information on district heating, and particularly with information on consumers with district heating at the moment. There's a general lack of data around pricing, so there's no information on the average prices paid, nor the range of prices paid across schemes. We don't even have a database that's publicly available at the moment that lists where schemes are. The government's estimates are based on estimates, you know, research that they've commissioned, and the information was actually collected on the basis that it would remain anonymous, so we can't even get access to that. There's no standard price comparator either for households, so that they can see how the cost that they're paying for their heating compares to the cost that consumers are paying for other forms of heating, whether that's on other heat networks or whether it's gas or electric heating. Some consumers could be getting a really cost competitive heat supply, but the fact of the matter is at the moment that we simply don't know. And we've received a number of complaints recently, and I know Consumer Futures have too, from groups of concerned consumers who think that they might be paying more than they ought to be, and that more than they are than groups of households on other forms of heating. And what they tell us is that they're very frustrated by a lack of price transparency from their supplier about what makes up the price components, and particularly what goes into the standing charge, and also whether their heat supplier is in receipt of subsidies, for example the RHI, the Renewable Heat Incentive, to promote district heating. If they are, how does this feed through into their bills, for example? Is it reasonable to expect companies to give a meaningful breakdown of the costs that go into the bill, including what makes up the standing charge? You know, would we expect this from companies in other sectors, in other markets? And I mean, we wouldn't expect it from Tesco's. You know, what's the breakdown, you know, of the cost of the pint of milk, or, you know, if you're buying a television, you know, what are the various cost components that go into that? But the issue here is that this isn't a market, it's a monopoly. There's no regulator, though, setting or monitoring prices, so price transparency is clearly really important. And I've been involved recently in a voluntary consumer protection scheme that is trying to be set up, and there's a public consultation that's going to open, I think, in a couple of weeks, that the Combined Heat and Power Association are developing. And I mean, this is a step in the right direction, and it's looking at hopefully having some kind of price comparator as part of that. But ultimately, this is a voluntary scheme. You know, it's only going to be those companies that sign up that'll have consumers that are protected by it, and there's a number of challenges with having a voluntary scheme. You know, what would the sanctions be, and various things like that. So what we've been saying is that Ofgem should be given the powers to start looking at this area, start looking and exploring, you know, where is regulation needed, for example, and developing what a standard price comparator could look like to give consumers reassurance. Because otherwise, you know, if we're expecting lots of households to move on to district heating, and that includes ultimately if we're going to get to a situation where 20% of people are on district heating in built-up areas where there's a high heat load, you're going to have to go into retrofit, and you actually are going to have to get consumers accepting that this change is necessary and important. We've also found a lack of consumer complaints data in this area too. So it's really difficult to know what the key issues that consumers that currently have district heating are facing. DEC's done some research to understand how willing consumers might be to move on to district heating, but we think really the starting point should be to understand how satisfied consumers currently are with their district heating. And we're going to be carrying out some research this autumn to try and fill this gap. Moving on to my final case study area this evening, and that's subsidy levels for low carbon electricity. Information asymmetry is a major challenge for consumer groups when it comes to influencing policy to promote low carbon energy. As I'm sure you know, higher upfront costs and long payback periods for would-be investors make investment in low carbon technology a risky business proposition for developers. So in the short to medium term, governments need to put in place policies to provide financial support to encourage investment in these technologies. We accept this. We accept the government's legally binding targets. But the goal for government must be to ensure that they give the least subsidy necessary to developers to get sufficient investment to take place. After all, these costs ultimately get paid for by consumers. And just in terms of what's currently being paid for, at the moment, these policies add around £37 to the average household electricity bill. It's often quoted that the figures are far higher than this in the media, but it's around £37, although on top of this you see around £8 for the EU ETS and around £5 for the carbon price support as well, so you've got about £13 in carbon taxes as well. But costs will rise going forward as more low carbon generation is supported, so it's really important that we do everything we can to keep costs manageable and keep costs down. But setting subsidies appropriately for the various forms of low carbon technology is a major challenge, and by setting them appropriately I mean at the a minimum possible to get sufficient investment. There's significant uncertainty around the future costs of all forms of low carbon generation, whether that's the more mature forms such as onshore wind, but particularly the less mature forms such as round 3 offshore wind, CCS, carbon capture and storage technology, or nuclear. Even though that has been around for a while, there's still a lot of cost uncertainty around it. And the challenge we face in this area is that although nobody knows what the costs are going to be in 10 years' time for these technologies, nobody's perfectly informed, nobody's got the crystal ball, developers naturally have the greatest understandings of the likely costs for these electricity projects and the cost trajectories for the future, because these are the organisations that develop them, these are the people that are contracting with the suppliers, to get these things built. Not only that, these are the organisations that actually make the investment decision. They're crucial for meeting our targets. And this gives the information that energy companies and the developers have enormous weight with government. And this is a problem that we have, in the sense that the result is that these companies have massive informational advantages over government, which is a worry for us, but also over other stakeholders, including consumer groups such as ourselves. And we see this at the moment with the electricity market reform and the new contracts for difference regime that's coming into place. And I'm not sure how familiar people are with EMR, electricity market reform, or contracts for difference, so I'll just first briefly summarise contracts for difference and how they work. And basically, contracts for difference, or CFDs as they're known, will support new nuclear power, new renewable power and carbon capture and storage technology. And they do this by providing greater revenue certainty to potential developers through the introduction of long-term contracts. In the case of renewables, these are for 15 years. And for the duration of the contract, that CFD developer will receive a variable payment to the level of the pre-agreed strike price, and the strike price is the red line on this graph. So on top of the income that they get from the wholesale market, which the market reference price is used as a proxy as, they'll get this top-up payment up to the strike price. So the combined revenue that the generator with the CFD receives should equal the strike price. So from the combination of the top-up payment and the revenue that they get from selling their power in the wholesale market. So their revenue should remain broadly consistent for the duration of the contract. The CFD is two-way, so should the relevant market reference price, which again is the proxy for the wholesale price, rise above the strike price, generators are required to pay back to the central counterparty, which should find its way back to consumers. And we can see this in this illustrative graph happening in around 2026 and around 2029 as well, where the peaks go above the red line, and then at those points in time the generators should have to pay back. By guaranteeing the low carbon generator a certain price for the electricity that they sell, a CFD helps remove, or should help remove, much of the long-term price risk And in theory, this should mean that it reduces the cost of capital, so the cost at which these companies can borrow to make their developments. And in turn, this should mean that there's lower subsidy levels are needed, and therefore lower costs to consumers to encourage the level of investment that we need to see. A consultation on the levels of support for renewables closed last week. I should say that there's been quite an open process around the renewable strike prices, but there's further negotiations that are going on at the moment around nuclear and other contracts actually under the so-called FID enabling process, and CCS will be negotiated in this way too. But for renewables, there's been a consultation process on the support levels, and by the support levels I mean the strike prices. These are clearly important decisions because they determine how much consumers will pay collectively for the cost of that generation, either through the strike price and the wholesale price, for the period of that contract. So we're talking, 15 years. But for us as a consumer organisation, it's very difficult to challenge specific draft strike prices, as we just don't have the access to the data that generators naturally have. So much of our policy work in this area is focused on ensuring that the processes are in place to help overcome these information asymmetries, both for us, but actually more importantly for government, to ensure that consumers are protected and to give us confidence. The strike prices arrived are as good as they can be. I mean, I should say, that there's nobody knows what the perfect strike price is. So it's at the moment, everyone's trying to work out, what the developers are trying to work out, what they need to get their investments away. Government, what's the minimum that they can do to get these investments to happen. So, nobody's in a perfectly informed position. But what I'd like to do now is kind of highlight 3 areas, and we flagged these in our recent decarbonisation report, that we've been calling for, 3 things we've been calling for to try and overcome some of these information asymmetries and give us more confidence that consumers are going to be protected. And the first is we'd like to see an information transfer obligation on generators with subsidies. I'll take each of these in turn and talk about them in a bit more detail. We also want to see a broader role for the Electricity Market Reform panel of technical experts. And we also want to see the introduction of a competitive process for allocating CFDs to generators. So if I take the information transfer obligation first. At the moment, the government relies, as it's setting its strike prices, as it was setting its bands for the renewable obligation, on the voluntary provision of information from generators. From our point of view, this is a problem. I mean, clearly it's questionable how representative and comprehensive information is when it's provided on this basis, particularly given that the organisations providing the information aren't neutral bystanders. They've clearly got a vested interest in what strike prices are arrived at. And we also think this is a problem because this kind of lack of feeling like the information is comprehensive, because the generation costs are project specific. So even take offshore wind, for example, the costs between 2 different projects can vary significantly. To inform its analysis for draft strike prices under the CFD programme, the National Grid recently held a call for evidence on generation costs to inform the analysis it was doing. But the number of responses it got to its call for evidence and the report that went alongside it said were quite low, and the quality of responses also submitted varied. Not even all of the Big 6 submitted a response. In our July report, we said that we wanted to see all CFD generators be required to provide information on their outturn costs to government. This would be historic data, of course, so it wouldn't be a perfect indication of what strike prices should be for in the future. But it would go some way to helping overcome the information asymmetries that dog this area. And we think that the categories of information should be set out at the start so generators know what is needed, and then that the information that you get can be meaningfully compared between different sites and between different generators. We know this is likely to meet with opposition from generators on the grounds of commercial confidentiality, but this data could be anonymised once it's collected. In February of this year, DEC established the Electricity Market Reform panel of technical experts to scrutinise the analysis that the National Grid was doing for the draft delivery plan and contract for different strike prices. And we note that a few days after our report came out, their report came out where they gave their analysis of how National Grid had been doing. And they also referred to a similar knowledge transfer obligation. And they said there would be considerable value in the government collecting data on cost sites and performance metrics across all low carbon projects that have RO-FIT or CFD support. On the theme of the expert panel, I will now continue. We recognise that as a consumer organisation, we can't be given access to all the information. Clearly respect that these are private companies, there needs to be commercial confidentiality. That's a fact of life. But what we need to do, but we do need to feel confident that the data has been collected, you know, that it is being really scrutinised, and that the focus really is on costs and how much consumers will pay. The EMR panel of technical experts that I've already referred to has a remit that specifically excludes value for money, cost to consumers and affordability. We think this is daft. The panel should be able to comment any aspect of market design that impacts on costs from our perspective. We also think that they should have a role in advising on the appropriateness of all strike prices that are negotiated. So as I mentioned, we've got the renewable process where there's consultation and strike prices are agreed and they're kind of off the peg, if you like. But then we've got these contracts that are being negotiated behind doors, and there's no transparency in that process. And we appreciate that DEC says, you know, them providing information throughout the process kind of hinders their ability to negotiate. But we would feel much more confident if the body, the panel of technical experts or another similar body was scrutinising that process with a view to always ensuring that cost to consumers are centre stage, and that, you know, that the analysis is thorough and robust in the same way that it's been doing for National Grid for the analysis that it's been doing. We got an amendment tabled in the energy bill as the energy bill was going through Parliament in the report stage, which was basically for a beefed up role for the panel of technical experts, so it could have a view, a role in relation to all contracts. And this was actually supported by 232 MPs, but was narrowly defeated, and we're going to be continuing to push for this amendment to be retabled in the laws this autumn. We haven't given up on this score yet. So finally, competition for allocating CFDs. Given the inherent difficulties and information asymmetries that we have in setting subsidy levels administratively, in other words, you know, DEC sourcing these, deciding on what these strike prices are and then giving them to any generators that kind of come forward. We think that competition between low carbon generators and between different forms of low carbon generation should be introduced to help drive down subsidy costs. Even within different technologies, even within the same technology, there is significant difference in generation costs. So paying a generic strike price to all generators of that type will inevitably mean that some generators get more than they need to get that project away. Likewise, each year there's uncertainty around what the marginal plant will need to be to get sufficient investment in generation, and therefore what the strike price needs to be to get sufficient investment to meet targets. So we think that the transition to competition would help on both these scores. We recognise that this won't be easy. You know, it injects a level of uncertainty into the development process for generators. It's a challenge for government, but, you know, these are issues that need to be worked through now. Government has said that it's committed to a transition to competition, but the most recent statement it made on it was about as inconclusive as a statement can be, and it said it plans to move to a competitive price discovery process for all new generation, for all new low carbon technologies as soon as is practical, though we may still need to set prices administratively for some or all technologies from April the 1st, 2019 onwards. Instead, the government is embarking on a really complicated allocation process which potentially could introduce an aspect of competition, but this will depend on whether a certain proportion of the levy control framework budget, which is the cap basically that Treasury has put on DEC for what it can levy through bills, is deemed to have been used up in any delivery plan year, and therefore DEC had to move through a series of rounds to constrained rounds. This is kind of getting developers concerned at the moment because of, you know, the development risk associated with it, so they're not keen on it. And under this process, bids would be ranked according to price, apparently, but none of this is clear, and government's also talking about having minimum and maximum thresholds for certain technologies, which would again muddy the water. It's also talking about having annual reviews in any case for strike prices, should they be too high or too low. So there's risks anyway for developers at the moment, and we think there'd be much more value in kind of setting out at the start, you know, we're going to move to competition and this is how it's going to be done, and working through the challenges, you know, what kind of auctions do we want to see, which players might be disadvantages, and what do we need to put in place to kind of help overcome those. So we want to see much more clarity from government regarding when and how competition will be introduced. So to sum up, what I hope I've demonstrated is that a lack of price transparency and clear information is disadvantaged energy consumers, and we would consider it an important factor in explaining why we've got low levels of engagement in the retail market, and also why trust is low. Not the only reason, but, you know, it's an important part of the story. We also think that a lack of price transparency and a lack of clear information is likely to be a barrier to getting consumers to accept that they need to move to district heating, as the number of consumers on district heating are expected to increase going forward. Much of our campaigning work in this area, whether it's in relation to the wholesale markets or the retail markets, decarbonisation, is focused on trying to improve price transparency and the quality of information provided to consumers. And I've highlighted in the retail market example how we've had some successes, but that more needs to be done and why we think single unit pricing is needed. I've also shown how information asymmetry is a major challenge for us as a consumer organisation. I think I can't overstate how powerful a resource information is in the policy making process. And informational advantages for industry are inevitable. Kind of, we accept this. You know, these are the people that develop the projects, these are the people that supply the energy. So from our perspective, it's about getting the processes in place to help minimise the risks for consumers associated with these informational asymmetries. And I've illustrated that in relation to low carbon electricity and support levels for that. But we also see massive informational asymmetries in relation to the wholesale markets. And we talked about those in a report that my colleague Fiona wrote that came out in July. You know, dominance of over-the-counter, unclear trading, you know, the structure of companies that make it very difficult to see how much is traded internally and at what price, and various issues like that. What I would say, though, is that information asymmetry between industry and consumers isn't confined to the energy market. You know, we're a consumer organisation that works on issues across the board, and we see it in other markets we work on, whether that's personal finance, whether that's food, whether that's telecoms. But what I would conclude by saying is that we think it's particularly acute in this market, and government and Ofgem must do more to reduce the problems that arise for consumers from information asymmetry and to reassure consumers that prices are fair. I mean, what we see as well is when it comes to any kind of reforms, energy companies are obviously the people that are in the positions that can go, well, we think the reform would cost X. You know, they're in a position to say, you know, we think it would cost a lot of money to do this, that and the other. And it might do, but again, there's always that kind of imbalance of information there, which makes it difficult for us as a consumer organisation, and it's likely to discourage government and the regulator, Ofgem, from acting in certain areas. So it's a challenge that we're always having to work through. Thank you.